make Wales an equal society for all, including the most marginalised, as the Leader of the House said. And I was particularly glad that you started off your statement recognising the strong entrepreneurial spirit that Gypsies, Roma and Travellers have, and the different perspectives, and the fact that there is a diverse range of backgrounds, cultures and languages. And I do think it is the right thing to include Roma in this strategy, but I don't know whether you're able to say any more about the discussions you've had about that, because I know it is a complicated issue. I also welcome the site development and the money that's going to be put in, and I welcome the security of tenure and proposals for transit sites. I'm also pleased that the Leader of the House says that the government wants local authorities to be more proportionate about resolving unauthorised encampments. I had a letter from a young 15-year-old Gypsy traveller young woman. I don't know whether she sent a letter to the Leader of the House as well, but it was a deeply moving letter, and she says how millions are spent removing travellers from illegal sites instead of putting it into our education. Do you think we would be living on illegal grounds if we were educated, instead of being labelled a tramp, gyppo, pikey and thief before you even know us and try to understand? That was part of her letter, and I think if you look at it through the views of a child, a young person, and see the amount of money is spent on moving people on. So I'm glad you said that they were, you're going to encourage local authorities to take a more proportionate response. So I think there is progress, which is great, but obviously there are still areas of concern. There are still concerns about the poor health outcomes that have already been mentioned. And in the cross-party group, which I chair, we've heard a lot of examples of where Gypsies and travellers have met prejudice, really, when they're trying to access healthcare. So I think there's a lot more to do there. But it's absolutely vital, I think, that frontline health professions all receive awareness training and training in equality and cultural awareness, which I know is in the action plan. So I think it's very important that we do that, and that we also are able to measure when it's done and to keep a track of how it's going. I also think welcome the plan to find a model to fund specialist services for Gypsy, Roma and Traveller women who need specialist support because they're victims of violence, domestic abuse and sexual violence. I think that's very important. And then to go on to education, because of course education has been raised here a lot this afternoon, and we obviously have got the aim of improving education outcomes. However, there is still a lot of concern amongst the Gypsy traveller community and their sort of supporters about what is happening to the Traveller Education Service, which it appears that some local authorities are struggling to continue to fund. I know that the Neath Port Talbot Gypsy, Roma and Traveller Education Service has a petition about the cuts to the education budget, which is affecting the service, and I understand that many staff in local authorities across Wales are facing the threat of redundancy in this service. And this service has been so important in supporting Gypsies and travellers, young people, and I think it's really only because of that service that we have made the progress that we have in education. And this young person refers movingly to the help that she's been given by this service. So I don't know whether the Leader of the House is able to give any view of that. I mean, this young person said, my ethnicity... Are you winding up, please? Yeah, okay. Finally, when I met the Gypsy young people and with you, I think the issue was raised about broadband, and I wondered whether you had anything to comment about that. And then the last question is about Gypsies and travelling people who live in houses, whether any effort has been made to contact them and sense what they are feeling.
Yes, I mean, that's you'd expect nothing less from Julie Morgan than a comprehensive overview of the issues, and she's worked tirelessly in this regard all her life, I think, actually, it's fair to say, in a proud family tradition. On the health issues, we have gone to some trouble to make sure that the plan details how we intend to narrow the gap in health outcomes between Gypsies, Roma, travellers and the wider population, and that includes both physical and mental health. and therefore all the actions in this section will be undertaken with due consideration to both of those aspects, as that was always raised with me in some of the meetings we've attended together. There's a specific action within this section which covers the monitoring of local health board completion of health needs assessments, and that these results are then properly fed into the service planning. And I mentioned before about recording the ethnicity in order to be able to track the data, so that we do continue to have good data about whether it's working, and we will get the required evidence in responding to health needs, including mental health, and demonstrate where the additional action is needed as a result of the gathering of that. And we also want to make sure that we have it as central to the plan when we consult the community, to make sure that those that recording is working properly and to their benefit. So that's a really big part of it. In terms of the broadband, I'm delighted to say that we are looking now to see whether we can have good broadband on all of the local authority sites. The young woman who I was very impressed by, Deputy Presiding Officer, was very vehement to me that if we want to have flexible arrangements on site so people can log in and out of hub for education or local health, My Health Online and so on, that it was hopeless if the broadband was inadequate. And so I very much took that on board, and we're going to some efforts now to make sure that all of the sites map out where they are with that and make sure that the broadband is properly extended to cover that. The other issue is to make sure that we have the right connections with our Travelling Ahead projects to contact all of the people who are in our communities, including the ones who happen to be in settled accommodation at this time. I was very moved by one of the families who offered me an enormous amount of hospitality about her distress at having to be in bricks and mortar, as she called it, while her daughter was at university, and her desperation to get back out of that as soon as possible. And the strength of her feeling was plain. So we need to make sure that we take into account all of those issues, and I'm very, very determined to do so. And in terms of the learner support, as I said, I wanted to pay tribute to that. We will be working very hard with local authorities to ensure that the additional money we've given them so far goes into the right places, and to understand how they're doing the needs assessments because I understand as well from the consultations that we've undertaken that some of the services appear to be under threat, and I don't really see why that should be happening. So we're going to be looking very carefully to make sure that it doesn't happen, because we are funding it.
And finally, John Griffiths.
I too very much agree that it is a test of our new democracy